She walked into a biker clubhouse with a purple bruise wrapped around her fragile wrist and asked a question no one in that room was prepared to hear. And by the time the truth came out, the Iron Saints would be questioning how they ever let her walk back out that door alone. The music inside the Iron Saints clubhouse in Riverton cut off mid-chorus when the old wooden door creaked open. Not because anyone had announced trouble, but because instinct in a room full of hardened men rarely lied, and every head slowly turned toward the entrance, where a small elderly woman stood framed in the afternoon light, her silver hair pinned neatly into a loose bun, her floral dress modest and pressed, a lavender cardigan draped over narrow shoulders that looked too delicate for the world she had just stepped into. Diesel lowered his beer first. Knox set down his cards without finishing his hand. And somewhere in the back, a chair scraped against concrete as someone shifted to get a better look, because nothing about this scene made sense. The Iron Saints weren't exactly known for hosting garden parties, and the smell of oil, leather, and stale smoke didn't pair naturally with orthopedic shoes and pearly earrings. "Ma'am," Diesel called out carefully, not unkindly, "you sure you got the right place?" A couple of men gave uncertain chuckles, but they died quickly when the woman stepped fully inside and let the door shut behind her with a deliberate click that sounded louder than it should have. She didn't look confused, didn't look frightened either, which, if anything, unsettled them more. She simply clutched her worn leather purse with one hand, while the other arm, partially concealed in a medical brace, trembled faintly at her side. And that was when Knox noticed the deep discoloration creeping from beneath the edge of the fabric. Dark purple fading into yellow, the kind of bruise that didn't come from bumping into a coffee table. Ronan Grave Calloway, president of the Iron Saints, rose slowly from his chair near the back wall, his heavy boots echoing against the concrete floor as he approached her with the same measured calm he used when diffusing bar fights or confronting men twice his size. Grave had learned long ago that silence made people reveal more than threats ever could, and as he stopped a few feet from her, folding his arms across his chest, he studied not just the bruise, but the way she held herself. Straight spine, chin lifted, eyes tired but steady. "Can we help you?" he asked, his growly voice softer than the rest of him suggested. The woman cleared her throat gently. "My name is Margaret Whitaker," she said, her tone polite, almost rehearsed, as if she had practiced this moment in her kitchen mirror, "and I was wondering, can I work here?" The question landed like a dropped wrench, clanging through the room in stunned disbelief. Riggs actually let out a short bark of laughter before catching Gray's expression and shutting his mouth. And for several seconds, no one moved because this wasn't a plea for money. Wasn't a frightened grandmother asking for directions. It was a job application, delivered with quiet dignity in the last place anyone would think to apply. "Work," Knox repeated, eyebrows raised. Margaret nodded. "I can cook, clean, handle bookkeeping." "Handle bookkeeping. I was an accountant for 35 years before I retired. I don't need much. Just a few hours. Something useful." Brave's eyes flicked back to her arm. "What happened there?" he asked evenly. She hesitated only half a second too long. "I fell." "Where, at home, on what?" The smallest flicker crossed her face. "Calculation, something practiced." And then she smiled thinly. "I'm not as steady as I used to be." The room stayed silent, but every man there recognized the tone. They'd heard it from soldiers who didn't want to admit they were bleeding, from kids who'd been told not to talk, from women who swore everything was fine when it wasn't, and Graves stepped a little closer. "Not threatening, just present." "You live around here, Margaret, Cedar Lane," she answered. That caught his attention. Cedar Lane was old money territory, well-kept lawns, polished SUVs, not exactly the sort of place that sent its residents job hunting in biker bars. "Family?" he asked carefully. "My grandson," she replied, fingers tightening around her purse strap. "He lives with me." Brave didn't miss the shift. Not lives with him, not we share the house." She had corrected herself before finishing the sentence, and the bruise on her wrist seemed suddenly louder than the hum of the refrigerator in the corner. "And he knows you're here?" Knox asked bluntly. Margaret looked toward the door briefly before answering. "He doesn't concern himself with how I spend my afternoons." The understatement settled heavily in the air, and Grave made a decision without announcing it. "We've got a kitchen," he said finally. "Tina handles most of it, but she won't mind help. You show up 3 days a week. We pay fair cash." A visible exhale escaped her lips. Relief, carefully controlled but undeniable. "Thank you," she said quietly. Diesel shifted uncomfortably. "You sure about this, Grave?" he muttered. Grave didn't look away from Margaret. "We don't turn away someone asking to work." Margaret gave a small nod, gratitude flickering in her eyes, before being tucked neatly away like a fragile thing she didn't trust to leave exposed. And as she turned to leave, Grave noticed the way she winced when reaching for the door handle, the brace stiff against her wrist, the bruise peeking darker against pale skin, and something cold settled in his chest. Not anger yet, not fully, but recognition. People didn't walk into Ica clubhouses asking for jobs, unless they had run out of safer doors to knock on. And as the door closed behind her, and the low murmur of the room slowly resumed, Grave knew one thing with unsettling certainty: Margaret Whittaker hadn't come there looking for employment. She had come looking for protection, even if she didn't have the courage to say it out loud. By the 3rd week, the bruises were no longer hiding, and neither was the truth Margaret had been trying so hard to protect. Margaret Whittaker showed up every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at exactly 1:45 p.m., 15 minutes early without fail, her lavender cardigan neatly buttoned, her grey hair pinned in that same careful bun, her small leather purse tucked close to her side like it held more than just a wallet. She moved slowly but with purpose, as if each step toward the Iron Saints clubhouse required courage she wasn't willing to waste. And the men who had once stared at her in disbelief now barely glanced up because she had folded herself into their routine so seamlessly it felt unnatural to remember. She hadn't always been there. She cooked from scratch. Beef stew that simmered for hours, cornbread that came out golden and crisp at the edges, apple pies that made Diesel curse softly under his breath because they tasted like childhood. And she cleaned without being asked, wiping down counters, reorganizing cabinets, even labeling shelves in tidy handwriting that turned chaos into order. When she offered to look over the club's scattered receipts one afternoon, Knox had nearly laughed until she returned 30 minutes. Later, with everything balanced down to the cent, her accountant's precision still razor-sharp, despite the tremor in her left hand. But it was that hand, that arm, that Grave couldn't stop noticing. The first week it was wrapped in a beige brace, purple staining the skin near her wrist. The second week the brace was gone, but yellowing fingerprints bloomed along her forearm like fading storm clouds. And by the 3rd week a faint bruise shadowed the edge of her collarbone, just visible above the neckline of her dress. And when Diesel accidentally dropped a wrench in the garage one afternoon, the loud clanging made her flinch so violently she nearly dropped the tray she was carrying. Grave watched all of it without commenting, because pushing too soon closed doors faster than threats ever could. But Knox wasn't as patient. One Thursday, as Margaret scrubbed a pan at the sink, Knox leaned against the counter and said quietly, "You don't fall that often by accident." She didn't turn around. "I suppose I'm clumsier than I look." "You don't look clumsy," he replied, voice flat. The water kept running. The silence stretched. Finally, she shut the faucet off, dried her hands carefully, and faced him with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I appreciate the concern," she said softly, "but I assure you I managed just fine." Graves stepped into the kitchen doorway at that moment, having heard enough to confirm what his instincts had been screaming since day one. "Who's hurting you, Margaret?" he asked calmly. The question hung between them like fragile glass. For a second, just a second, her composure cracked. Her fingers tightened around the dish towel. Her shoulders dipped ever so slightly, and her eyes flickered toward the clubhouse entrance, as if checking whether someone might be watching. "No one," she answered automatically. "Grave didn't move. You came in here with a broken wrist and asked man you didn't know for work. You went when doors slam. You checked your phone every 10 minutes, like you're waiting for permission. That's not clumsiness." Her breath hitched, and Knox turned away, slightly, giving her space but not retreating. "My grandson," she whispered finally so softly it barely carried. The words settled heavy. Diesel, who had wandered closer without meaning to, muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like a prayer wrapped in profanity. "Tyler," she continued, still not looking at them. "After my husband passed, I signed the house over to him. He said it would simplify the taxes. He handles my banking now. All of it." And Grave prompted gently, "And he gets angry." She said, voice trembling now. "He says I embarrass him, that I am ungrateful, that I owe him for taking care of me." She swallowed hard. "Sometimes he drinks." The understatement made Knox's jaw tighten. "Has he hit you?" Brave asked quietly. A long pause, then a nod, so small it would have been easy to miss if they weren't watching for it. "Only when I argue," she said quickly, as if clarifying the rules made it reasonable. "And I shouldn't argue. It's his house now." Grave felt something dark and controlled rise in his chest. Not reckless rage, but the cold, steady kind that planned. "Margaret," he said carefully. "Whose name is on the deed is," she replied. "After the transfer and your accounts join Access, but he manages them." Diesel leaned against the wall, running a hand over his beard. "You got any money of your own?" She hesitated. "A small pension. It goes into the account he oversees." Knox exhaled sharply. "That's not oversight. That's control." She didn't argue. That was answer enough. Later that evening, as Margaret packed her purse to leave, Grave walked her to the door. "You don't have to go back there," he said quietly. She gave him a sad smile. "And go where?" "We can figure something out." She shook her head. "You've already done enough. I won't be a burden." The word lingered like a wound. "You're not a burden," he replied evenly. She reached for the door handle, and this time he saw a fresh bruising forming near her elbow, darker than the others. "Did he do that today?" he asked. Her silence was louder than any confession. He was upset. "I wasn't home when he expected," she murmured. "He worries when he doesn't know where I am." Diesel stepped forward before he could stop himself. "That's not worry." Margaret's eyes glistened, but didn't spill. "Please," she said softly. "Don't make it worse." Grave nodded slowly, though something inside him had already shifted from suspicion to certainty as she walked down the steps toward the streetlight, shoulders slightly hunched, purse clutched tight. He realized she hadn't come to them for money or company. She had come because somewhere deep down she knew that if things escalated, this was the only place in town strong enough to stand between her and whatever waited behind her front door. And as the clubhouse door shut behind him, and the man gathered in tense silence, Brave spoke the words none of them could ignore anymore. "We're not just giving her a job. We're building a case." By the time Tyler Whittaker stormed through the doors of the Iron Sades clubhouse, red-faced and reeking of whiskey, the men inside already knew exactly who he was, and they were ready. It happened on a Friday, just after 5. Margaret, still in the kitchen, carefully wrapping leftover cornbread and foil when the front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. Conversations died instantly as a tall man in his early 30s staggered 2 steps inside. Expensive sneakers scuffed, polo shirt wrinkled, eyes sharp with the kind of entitlement that mistook cruelty for authority. "Where is she?" he barked, scanning the room like he owned it. Diesel stood slowly. Knox didn't move at all. Brave rose from his chair near the back, calm as ever. "You must be Tyler," Grave said evenly. Tyler's gaze snapped toward him. "You think this is funny? My grandmother has no business being in a dump like this." He took another step forward. "Margaret." He shouted toward the kitchen. Inside, Margaret froze, hands trembling over the foil. Knox moved subtly, positioning himself between the hallway and Tyler without looking obvious about it. "She's finishing her shift," Brave replied. "She'll leave when she's ready." Tyler laughed harshly. "She doesn't get to decide that." The room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Leather vests straightened, boots planted, shoulders squared. "She does." Tyler Unk's eyes narrowed. "You bikers think you're some kind of heroes. She's confused, old. She signs what I put in front of her because she trusts me. We know." Knox muttered under his breath. Tyler's head snapped toward him. "What's that supposed to mean?" That was when the side door opened and Margaret stepped into view. Smaller than ever against the backdrop of leather and steel, but steadier than she'd been in weeks. There was a faint yellow bruise along her jaw, this time poorly concealed with makeup. Tyler saw it too, and his jaw tightened in warning. "We're leaving," he said sharply. Margaret didn't move. Brave spoke before she could respond. "Not yet." Tyler scoffed. "You don't get a vote." "Actually," came a new voice from the doorway behind him. "He does." Tyler turned to find a woman in a grey blazer stepping inside, holding a leather folder under her arm. Behind her stood a uniformed police officer. "Tyler Whitaker?" she asked professionally. "Yes." His confidence faltered slightly. "I'm Detective Ramirez. We need to speak with you regarding financial exploitation and elder abuse allegations." The color drained from his face. "That's ridiculous." He laughed nervously. "This is some kind of misunderstanding." Grave didn't blink. "No misunderstanding. Over the past 2 weeks, while Margaret cooked and balanced receipts, the Iron Saints had been busy. Knox had quietly contacted an attorney he trusted. Diesel had helped Ma Ragaret open a new private account. Grave had encouraged her to retrieve old paperwork Tyler thought had been discarded. Bank statements showed withdrawals she never approved. Loan documents carried signatures that forensic review suggested were forged. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's security camera, legally obtained, showed Tyler grabbing her arm violently on more than one occasion outside the house. And Margaret, after one long night of tears in the clubhouse office, had finally agreed to give a full statement. "She's my grandmother." Tyler snapped. "Family business." Detective Ramirez's expression didn't change. "Family doesn't grant you the right to assault or defraud someone." The officer stepped closer. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with us." Tyler looked around wildly, as if expecting someone to laugh and dismiss this as a prank, but all he saw were silent, unflinching faces. He pointed at Margaret. "You did this." For a moment, fear flickered in her eyes, old reflexes dying slowly. But then something else rose in its place. "No," she said, voice quiet but clear. "You did." That was the moment the Iron Saints would remember later. Not the handcuffs clicking into place, not Tyler shouting about lawyers and betrayal, but the way Margaret's spine straightened as the officer guided him out the door. For the first time since she had walked into their clubhouse asking for work, she wasn't shrinking, she was standing. The door shut. Silence filled the space. Margaret swayed slightly, and Diesel was there instantly with a chair. She sat down carefully, hands folded in her lap, staring at the floor, as if expecting the world to snap back into cruelty at any second. Brave crouched beside her. "You okay?" She let out a long breath, the kind that carried years inside it. "I don't know yet," she admitted. The legal process moved faster than Tyler expected. With the documentation provided, the district attorney filed charges for assault, fraud, and coercive control. The house transfer was challenged in court under undue influence statutes, and a temporary protective order barred Tyler from coming within 500 feet of her. His accounts were frozen, pending investigation. Margaret didn't return to Cedar Lane. She didn't have to. The Iron Saints cleared out an unused upstairs storage room, painted the walls a soft cream, installed new locks, and placed a sturdy oak desk near the window because she liked natural light. When reviewing paperwork, Tina brought fresh curtains. Knox assembled the proper bed frame. Diesel fixed the loose stair railing himself. When Margaret walked into the finished space 2 days later, she pressed her fingers to her mouth and cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears of someone who had survived something she'd convinced herself she deserved. That Sunday during dinner, Grave raised a glass. "To Margaret," he said, "who walked in here asking for a job." Diesel smirked and ended up reorganizing our entire lives. A ripple of laughter moved through the room. Warm and genuine, Margaret stood slowly, glass of iced tea trembling slightly in her hand. "I thought I was coming here to earn my keep," she said softly. "I didn't realize I was walking into the only place strong enough to remind me I still had worth." Even Knox looked down at that. Later that night, Margaret sat outside on the clubhouse steps beneath a sky scattered with stars, the cool air brushing her cheeks. Grave joined her quietly. "Regret it?" he asked. She considered the question carefully. "I regret staying silent as long as I did," she said. "But I don't regret walking through that door." He nodded. Inside, laughter echoed faintly. Someone argued over a card game. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through an open window. It wasn't the life she had imagined at 78, but it was safe. And sometimes safety is the bravest dream of all. Margaret Whittaker had walked into a biker clubhouse with a bruised arm asking for work. What she found, instead, was something far more powerful.